Governor Beshear, former governors, distinguished guests, friends and family. I'm John Brown III, and it's an honor that you all are here to honor our father. Someone mentioned to me that he died on the same day John F. Kennedy died, and it reminded me of a story. When Kennedy was assassinated, a journalist said to one of Kennedy's aides, "We'll never laugh again." And the aide, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, future U.S. Senator, responded, "Oh, we'll laugh again, we'll just never be young again." And I thought of my dad, the difference being that Kennedy was just 46 and he was 88 and was so young at heart all the way to the end. One of my favorite stories about him near the end of his life was just before COVID. He called some old friends and said, "I miss you all. We haven't seen each other in a long time. Let's get together for dinner at Merrick Inn." And they said, "Sure." And so they met the next week. But my father left after about 30 minutes. And the friends called my mom the next day and said, "Is everything okay with John Y? We had this dinner, but he left after about 30 minutes. And my mom called me and said, "Is everything okay with your dad? He left right after this dinner he set up started." And I said, "I don't know, I'll call him." So I called my dad and he said, "Oh yeah, I got there and they were all so old and boring. I just couldn't take it. I had to get out of there." I said, "Of course you did." And moving to the opposite end of the age spectrum, and I'll share some stories about him that I think capture his essence and what made him so memorable and lovable to all of us. And the first story is when he was just 1 year old, his parents were concerned that he wasn't developing rapidly enough, and they took him to a child psychologist. And the child psychologist took a blanket, blue blanket, put it out on the floor, put my dad in the middle of it, and put a bright red ball in one of the corners of the blanket and encouraged my dad to retrieve it, to play with. And after a few moments, my dad just took the blanket and pulled the ball to him, which I think even as a toddler, you could see that he saw the world a little differently than the rest of us and saw opportunities and ways of solving problems that just didn't come easily to the rest of us. Growing up, I heard over and over again how important it is to learn how to sell yourself and your ideas. And to the end of his life, he carried in his wallet a copy of the check of his first paycheck from Encyclopedia Britannica, where he learned how to sell door to door. And I remember the story. He and my mom, on their first date, they were in Eastern Kentucky, and he had just finished selling his 5th set of encyclopedias, and it was getting late, and it was time for dinner. And he got in the car and said, "I just tied my all-time record." And most women would have said, "Well, that's wonderful. Let's go to dinner and celebrate." But my mom said, "Well, why don't you go for your record then?" And my dad told me later, he said, "It was at that moment I thought I may have to marry that woman." And he did. And he was a bold thinker, and he used to say, "Never miss out on an opportunity. The saddest thing in life is an opportunity missed." And when I was just 1 year old, he was practicing law with his father. In Lexington, the office was Brown and Son. In Louisville, it was Brown and Father, very fittingly. And at a time when most people were looking for stability, he had the opportunity of meeting Colonel Sanders and decided to leave the law and to take a chance. And he ended up building the second biggest fast food chain in the world over the next 7 years because he took a chance. And after that, he got into sports a bit. And He bought the Kentucky Colonels basketball team. They were an ABA team, and they were losing money. But I loved the team. But because they were losing money, he sold them out to a group in Cincinnati. And on his way home that night, my mom told me, and I was very upset about it, and met him at the door, tears in my eyes, begging him, please, Dad, you can't sell the Colonels. And he said he realized at that moment that there were kids all across the state who felt the same way and that he'd made a big mistake. And so I would call him every day at work and say, what are the odds of you getting back the team now? And it started off 30-70 against, and then it was 50-50, and then 70-30, and then we got it up to 90-10, and I started to breathe a little easier, and he finally got the team back, and he gave it to my mom and an all-female board of directors. And they went on and broke ticket sales records, and 2 years later won the championship. And I think that was a testament to something else he always said. Find people who are smarter and more able than you, and trust me, there's a lot of them, and get out of their way. And he was always bold in his thinking, and that was a very bold move and a wonderful memory. And he told me a few weeks ago when we were in the hospital, in his hospital room, he was apologizing for not spending, he said, I know I didn't spend as much time with you when you were younger, and I always regret that, but I did buy you a basketball team, and that has to count for something, you know. And I said, oh yeah, that counts. That counts for a lot. I appreciated that. Which leads me to my next story. We had a father-son trip when I was 13. Lincoln's giving me the thumbs up for this. This one was on the bubble, but we'll go for it. My mom was very pleased. We were going to go whitewater rafting and go camping for 3 days. My mom said, oh, this is wonderful. You're all going to be camping out. You'll be in tents. This is wonderful. Great father-son time. So we flew to Idaho, and we started this whitewater rafting with a small group. But there wasn't much white water, and so the guide started giving us tours through these caves, and there was some Native American drawings, and I had enough of my mom in me to know that I should be interested in this stuff, but I had enough of my dad in me to know that he was miserable. And I saw him pull the guide aside after a few hours, and he said, is there any chance that you could drop us off a little early from this trip? I'm willing to pay extra if you can. And the guide said yes. So the next day he dropped us off at some kind of Indian reservation, and my dad paid a gentleman there $50 to drive his pickup truck into town and drop it off at the airport. And when we got there, and then we chartered a flight to Las Vegas after that. And I called my mom and I said, we're not sleeping in a tent tonight. We walked in with duffel bags, and then school started the next week, and I had to write a composition on what I did that summer. And I thought, should I or shouldn't I? And I assume, Governor, you and Steve never went camping in Vegas on a father-son trip, did you? Not yet. Okay. But we had a good time. And I have great memories of that trip. And he was always fun. If John Y was around, you were going to have a great time with him, you know. And so not long after that, he met and married Phyllis. They had a whirlwind romance. And while on their honeymoon, there were just a few days left before you could file for governor. And they cut the honeymoon short. They came back to Kentucky, and they filed against all odds. No one gave them any chance of winning, but they ran a brilliant campaign, crisscrossing the state, wonderful team, and they won. And he became governor and went on to do all the wonderful things you've been reading about in the paper the last few days. And because he took a chance. And I know his father used to say, the only time you fail in life is when you fail to try. And I'm sure that was echoing in my father's head during that time. And he had a wonderful sense of humor. Late in his administration, my sisters and I were visiting him, and he said, you know, once you have a few big successes in life, you start getting awards for all sorts of things. And he had us come in his office, and he showed us he had just been named National Parent of the Year. And, and he said, so what does it feel like to be a child of the National Parent of the Year? And I said, I love you, Dad, and congratulations, but honestly, if you're the best there is out there, I'm really concerned for all the other kids in the world. And he gave me a high five and said, you're right, you're right. And he loved to laugh at himself and had a wonderful self-effacing, humor. And then a few years after that, I finished law school, and I had 2 great job offers with Kentucky law firms, but my dad convinced me to come work for him, and in typical John Y. Brown fashion, he hired me for $8,000 less than I could make at the other job, but convinced me it was in my best interest and that I should thank him for it. And so I got to be managed by him for a couple years, and he had sort of a Tom Sawyer-esque style about him. And I don't know if you all remember that scene in Tom Sawyer where he's supposed to whitewash the fence, and all the other kids are playing. And he comes up with this idea that he'll make whitewashing a fence seem so engaging and enticing that he'll get the other kids to pay him for the privilege of whitewashing the fence. And so there were many times at Kenny Rogers Roasters where I would tell Rebecca, my dad told me he just did me a favor, but it sure feels like I'm whitewashing a fence right now. And I just gave him an apple and a kite to do it. So, but he had such charm, and they don't tell you that in any business books. But if you have charm, use it. And he had the charm. And it was wonderful seeing him, too, at that age, in his 60s. He kept starting new companies and new businesses. His Colonel Sanders said, you'll rust out before you'll wear out. And my dad really lived that, and it was wonderful to see that. And then we get to the final decade of his life, which was the sweetest years, I think, of his life. And the one that was the period that was most touching, I think, to all of his children and grandchildren. He really became a wonderful parent to us, and he really cared, and he wanted to be with us. And it was a very sweet time. And I remember, when I was a child, the Harry Chapin song, "The Cat's in the Cradle," was popular. And I used to be very sad when I would hear that song, because there were the words that, we'll get together then, we're going to have a good time then, but it didn't happen. And a day after he died, I listened to that song again, but I wasn't sad this time, because we had many thens. We had many thens and many good times, and it was a wonderful gift that he gave all of us. And there's a poem from Robert Bly called "Finding the Father" that I read recently. It's about a father who leaves the family when the child is young and works different jobs all over the world, misses the child's childhood, and then it's up to the adult child to find the father. And the last lines of the poem go, "When you light the lamp, you will find him. He's sitting behind the door, his eyebrows heavy, his forehead light, lonely in his whole body, waiting for you." And I think each of my siblings and I lit our own lamps, and we found our father, and we found a beautiful relationship with him that he always wanted, but maybe didn't have the time or ability to give to us earlier, but did at the end. And if you want to know the measure of a man, watch how he dies. And our father died a beautiful death with all 5 children by his side, loving on him, caring for him, my son, his namesake, kissing him on the forehead and whispering in his ear. Not many grandchildren can say that their grandfather is their hero, but I can. And moments after he died, I looked at him and I said, "You even nailed this phase of life." And he did. And as we go to collect his things over the next few days, when I find that plaque, Father of the Year, I'll happily polish it and hang it somewhere proudly, because he earned that too. I love you, Pops.